Hey Miller, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. We've had a few interactions and they've always
Yeah.
been electric. And so I was like, I need to get her on the show. And then you had some recent funding round closed, and I was like, oh, yeah, we definitely have to have her on the show for
The timing
sure.
is and serendipitous, and the feeling is mutual. Every time we've connected, I've left feeling really energized and hopeful. And I think that feels like a really big win in our space. And so I'm really grateful to be here and chatting with you about coma.
Perfect. Why
Yeah.
don't you kick off by telling our audience a little bit more about your background and then the work that you do in women's health?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. My name is Miller Morris. I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee, where I was born and raised and moved back not too long ago. I come from a public health background, so I'm an epidemiologist by training and have a background both in the social determinants of health and in global health. Epidemiology was really my focus, narrowing in on women and girls and on reproductive health. I have some work that I've done in all over the world, sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, Mozambique, some in Central America. Did some policy work at the WHO in Geneva for a little bit of time, and really found myself understanding pretty early in my career that public health generally and women's health more specifically was going to be ripe for a ton of transformation during my career, and was looking for resilient and creative ways to continue to do really meaningful and impactful work in the reproductive health space, which led me to my current role now as founder and CEO of an integrated period care company called Comma, which does secure cycle tracking, sustainable consumer product good, and here in the next little bit, laboratory diagnostics on menstrual blood to bring predictive and personalized care to to reproductive health through the menstrual cycle. So yeah, really glad to be here and share a little bit of our exciting news and progress, but also some of the challenges, the good, bad, and ugly. I think that's imperative to be just as transparent about as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for
yeah. And
having me.
people come to the show to hear all those factors, right? They want to be
Absolutely.
excited, but
Absolutely.
they also know that they're probably going to leave the episodes feeling a little angry, a little disappointed, but we always like to
Yep.
throw in hope and
Yep.
enthusiasm
Yep.
in there.
Absolutely. There are two sides of the same coin when you work in women's health. And yeah, it would not be a genuine representation of the work or the space to leave out one or the other. Yeah,
Totally,
hopefully I
totally.
can contribute that today.
Tell us a little bit more about your company. What is Comma? And then Sarah is the product. So break all
Yes.
this down for us. What does your company do?
Sure. Sure. So, me and my team were really interested in a way in which we could use the menstrual cycle, use periods, which over half of the world experiences for decades of their life on end, as more than just a this is an aisle at Walmart experience, or this is something that we do but don't talk about with our girlfriends experience. And thinking about what menstruation is, which is the biological process that allows us to be able to reproduce and make more humans. And as you mentioned in your book, it's actually a very rare experience amongst the animal kingdom. It's this is a process that's full of, I think, really remarkable scientific data that can be super useful for clinical medicine, for reproductive health, for behavioral health, for optimizing human performance, or even just making our lives more comfortable by having a better informed understanding of what my body is doing on a day-to-day basis, because it's really different than what my partner's body is doing on a day-to-day basis because he doesn't have a period. And so we started thinking about menstruation holistically and what the space currently offers and also what it doesn't. And one thing that we found was that there's not a ton of connective tissue in the period care industry. You have software where you can track your cycle. There are consumer products that now exist in a variety of forms and made out of a variety of materials, but that industry is pretty siloed. And then there's this nascent field of diagnostics of thinking about menstrual blood as passing through the uterus, through the cervix, through the vagina, picking up meaningful tissue and cells along that pathway. And we were really fascinated with the idea of a period care company that was bigger than the sum of its parts and that dabbled in all three of those areas. And that when those three products and services came together, that they could create an experience and contribute to public health and to science in a way that doesn't exist when we just think about cycle tracking in a vacuum in the software space, or we just think about laboratory diagnostics as something that we should wait for clinical medicine to catch up to and not be really innovating in using some of the really remarkable inroads that we've seen in the consumer space. So Comma is just that. It's an integrated period care company. Our first product to market, like you said, is called Sara. She's the secure application for reproductive autonomy, named after my beloved sister who taught me to put in a tampon as well as do a million other things. And so much of her persona and my other older sister Jessie's persona, I feel when I use the product and throughout the build. So Sara is meant to be more than just a cycle tracking app that helps you understand when you should or shouldn't wear white jeans. As I mentioned, I'm an epidemiologist. I come from a biomedical research background. And so it's meant to be a tool that can really help you better understand your risk for certain disease and disorder, help you understand what about your cycle is typical, but not just based on outdated and biased literature, but also what form of contraception are you on? Is that coloring your experience? If you were to switch your form of birth control or come off of it, should you expect to see any changes in your menstrual cycle? And then in the future, Sara can help you inform a customized subscription service to our biodegradable tampon line, which is coming later in 2025. And then as we pilot our diagnostic send back service in that same timeline, those data can live within Sara, and the biomarker data and the behavioral health data can come together to create the most complete and robust picture of personalized reproductive care that exists, which I think is really exciting.
Absolutely. And you keep saying the word secure. Can you talk about that a little bit
Yeah,
more? What do you mean by that?
sure. So we're the first and only cycle tracking app that I know of that benchmarks with HIPAA and that believes that your cycle tracking data, first and foremost, should be treated as protected healthcare information. And I mentioned HIPAA, which is a US piece of legislation or an American piece of legislation that outlines how healthcare information should and shouldn't be treated. And so it is limiting to a certain geographical context, but we also think about HIPAA not just as legislation, but as principle, like how should healthcare information be shared or be used, and how shouldn't it be? And so first and foremost, this means that we don't sell end user data. We don't have a revenue model in which we would sell Brittany's data, and that's how the company is meant to stay afloat. That's never been how we built our business roadmap. However, we do have on our business roadmap the opportunity to make these data with your consent linkable with your electronic medical record. So maybe you are one out of every 10 American women who thinks you might have endometriosis, but you've really struggled to be taken seriously in a clinical setting. What would it look like to show up to your 15-minute annual exam with your gynecologist, armed with data to your body, your cycle, and your struggle that provider also had access to because you opted into that interoperability? And then you all could come to the clinic room and have a meaningful data-driven conversation in which you, the patient, feels empowered, and the provider also has the information that they need to be able to ascertain next steps and hopefully also fast track some of that intervention that otherwise is taking people years and years to gain access to.
I don't know of any other health vertical where patients are so frequently bringing in their own health data to prove to their doctor, one, to
Absolutely.
get believed, like this is
Mm-hmm.
seriously happening. Look at how often I'm missing my period or getting my period or how heavy it is or this pain
Exactly.
metric that I've journaled about. So being believed, but also it is, and in defense of physicians, it's challenging in a 10 to 15-minute
Yes.
conversation to diagnose
Yes.
somebody with some things that you don't even have a test. You're literally diagnosing based on the information they're giving you. And I know even for myself, sometimes the simple question of when was the last day of your last period? I'm like, and that's like the most
Totally.
basic one. I'm like, I don't know, a few weeks ago, useless. But being able to print out something and provide it to the doctor. Do you think that gynecologists in particular particular are really open to their patients bringing in their health data? And is there an ego complex where they're like, I'm the doctor, you're the patient, why are you bringing me data? Or do you find gynecology, they're like excited to be getting extra information?
Totally. I'm glad you asked that because it has not been my experience that physicians are threatened
Mhm.
by this potential. I think not all, but most folks who choose a clinical or biomedical career in women's and reproductive health live our truth every day, which is that this space has been neglected, it's been underfunded, it's been under researched. And that obviously affects the lives of women and menstruating people everywhere, but it also affects the lives of their clinicians. I truly do believe, based on my own personal experience as a patient, but also as an epidemiologist and also as a founder in this space, that the women's health clinical system wants to get better. And we are sitting at a period in time in which no one's coming to save it unless we do it ourselves. And
Mhm.
so there is a true interest and enthusiasm and willingness to be collaborative that I've experienced amongst the gynecological community. That, to be completely frank, a lot of people told me I shouldn't expect and that I should expect the opposite. And so that's been a real joy. I also just want to note something about what you said of even those of us who eat, sleep, breathe women's health sometimes are like, shit, when was my last cycle?
Yeah.
And I just want to speak to how powerful it is to be one of those people and be in my seat as the founder and of the CEO of this startup. And I think that's a larger trend that I love to see when we have founders who are of their market and who personally experience what it is that they're trying to solve for, and that they're trying to solve a problem that isn't just like a market valuation, but truly a pain point that they have experienced, that people that they love experience. You get a different kind of product. That's a different kind of output that breeds a different kind of input that breeds a different kind of output. And so this conversation around showing up to your doctor's appointment with data that you feel empowered by is one that was hugely informed by me and my team's experience in that position. But because I'm an epidemiologist and because we've built ourselves to be a tool in healthcare and not just a consumer technology and not just a consumer product good company, and we're benchmarking with the standards and best practices of healthcare in the clinical space, we are building a tool that's meant to be legitimate, not just to us as end users, but also to the clinicians who have the power to help us unlock the next steps in changing our reproductive health for the better. And that is huge. We're not just using questions that we grab out of the blue from the boardroom that we ask end users. We're using empirically validated clinical surveys and questionnaires so that we can turn around these data to the healthcare community and say, stop diminishing her experience. Like, we used a tool that you learned about in medical school and that you put on your clipboard as part of intake paper. We've just done it in a way that is digitized, is intelligent, and is meant to learn and is meant to feel as accessible to the end user as it is useful from a clinical perspective, which I think is very unique and really exciting to me.
Yeah, it's the story of any health tech company, right? Hey, you
Totally.
had this really old school way of doing stuff with pen
Yeah.
and paper.
Yeah.
Now we've digitized it, right?
Yeah.
And so speaking of tech, you recently closed a large round of funding. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Incredible. But
Thank
what
you.
was that experience like raising capital for a data secure period tracking app?
What a time. I think that anybody who put themselves and their idea and their business out there in 2024 and tried to raise capital deserves a medal, to be completely honest. It was really tough, and I don't want to diminish that. And I feel really lucky because I know a lot more founders who weren't able to raise capital in the last 12 months than who did. One of the things I'm most proud of from our raise is that over half of our seed investors are women. And that just as I spoke to the importance of founders being of their market, I think that translates into shareholders as well. And as I start to think about Comma's next chapter and our growth and our scale and what it's going to be like to have stakeholders at the table who are our investors, who are our shareholders, who believe in this product and not just its commercial viability, but believe in it because they wish that they had it 10 years ago, or they want their daughters or their grandchildren to have it. And so I think that if you are somebody who maybe listens to this podcast or any other founder stories, and you're really resonating with the importance of, I'm solving a problem that I myself have experienced. Raising capital is really challenging, and that's non-negotiable. It's going to be a struggle regardless of how you do it. And if you're willing to play on hard mode and really look for values aligned investors, I think it's going to make all the difference for us in the long term. I feel well mentored. I feel supported in the ways that we've made decisions in the last several months. And that means that I did turn down a couple of checks, which was a pretty unpopular opinion, especially last year. And again, I don't want to minimize how hard it is to raise capital at all and how grateful and privileged I feel to have been in an opportunity to really maximize our chances of closing this round. But if your gut tells you to be picky, I think it's really important to listen to that too. And I don't hear that part of the fundraising story as much as I hear it's really hard, take what you get and don't fuss a bit, essentially. And I think that ethos just doesn't map onto our space in the way that it might map onto people who are building different kinds of products and services.
Especially in today's day and age when women's fertility, pregnancy status, menstrual cycle data is incredibly valuable and incredibly sensitive. And so making sure that you have the right stakeholders that are all on the right team that are saying, yeah, we're never going to have a business model that sells data. Like we're all on board with that. That's a super critical, especially at your early stage.
Absolutely.
Looking at the distribution of femtech companies, we have over 1,600 active femtech companies in the world, which is so cool. I remember when I first started tracking the femtech companies back in 2020, I had a list of 300, and 50% of femtech companies were founded in the last 5 years. So part of my list only being 300 was that I had just started the list, but part of it was that a lot of companies like yours hadn't even been formed yet, right? And but of these 1,600 companies, we know that 32% of them are focused on menstruation, which is the highest of any women's health categories, from menopause, chronic conditions, heart health, breast cancer, all of those. Menstruation is 32%. So of this distribution, you being one of those in that category, why do you think so many people are working on menstruation as a product type?
Yeah. Harking back to what I said earlier, I think it's because it's our through line. I like data and graphs. Like I nerd out over all of that stuff. And I totally circled that graph of the distribution of FemTech categories in your book, which I've really enjoyed reading the last couple of weeks. And I think it's really important that we note, and you've spoken about this on previous podcasts with other founders, in women's and reproductive health, these categories actually are not nearly as like compartmentalized as you might see in other types of sectors. Menstrual health, in my opinion, is menopause health. Menstrual health, in my opinion, is cancer and oncology research. Menstrual health is biohacking and human performance optimization and nutrition. Like these categories are deeply intrinsically linked. And so while I'm really happy and like buzzing to know about this 32%, I also imagine our space as like a watercolor canvas, more so now than just a chart of facts and figures of who works where. And that's not just because the categories themselves have deep overlap and interconnectivity, but also because my experience has been like that this is how the founders work. I've spoken to folks in the menopause space, and immediately within 5 minutes on the call, I'm so excited to work together and to figure out a way in which we can continue to make women's lives better.
Yeah.
And they all see the potential for period care and cycle tracking to be really powerful for their business. And so I see it as, yeah, the DNA that runs through the entire industry,
So
both literally and physically.
what I hear you
That's where
saying is, Britt, you think 32% is high. News alert, all of it is menstrual health. That's what
I think 2% of it is, or should I just say, instead of thinking about it as just like a third of the categories, I see it as like a foundational category
Yeah.
on top of which we can build so much
Which
more.
absolutely makes sense because if you have a company targeting migraine in females, you are
Yeah.
actually probably looking at
Yeah.
hormonal health because migraines are so
Absolutely.
often associated with
Absolutely.
your menses or menopause. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, you make a great argument there.
Yeah.
Actually, speaking of periods, can we get nerd out a little bit? Because I love that you're
Yeah.
epidemiologist, geneticist here. Let's give our listeners a little bit of biology and science. We've been talking a lot about business. Let's just
Let's
take
do
a
it.
little side street for a quick hot second. Why are periods so rare? So there's only a few species that have periods, like including the
Hmm.
elephant shrew, which is this adorable little mouse,
Yes.
some bats,
Yep.
I think some monkeys, and then us. Like that's it. By the way, your
Hmm.
dog in heat is not her period. She's actually fertile.
Nope.
A lot of
Yep.
people think, oh, she's on her period. Your dogs don't have periods. They are using blood to as a
Hmm.
lubricant and an attractant for
Hmm.
male.
It's
Anyways,
pheromones. Yeah.
dog canine announcement PSA there. Dogs don't have periods. Humans do. Why do we have them?
I think people have differing takes on that, but my take, and I'm pretty sure from reading your work, it's aligned with yours, is that periods keep us safe because pregnancy is dangerous. Pregnancy is beautiful. Pregnancy is exciting. Pregnancy is life giving. Clinically, pregnancy is a disease state. Clinically, pregnancy is really challenging and taxing on the body. And periods are a safeguard. They're the bumper rails in the bowling alley that say, hey, your body is not ready for this month, or this egg statistically not viable. And also, it's an evolutionary checkpoint in between pregnancies to remind mothers and parents to continue to nurture newborn as opposed to just continue to get pregnant.
Mhm.
And I would love your take on this, but I struggle to tell this story, the story of the science, in a way that simultaneously gives truth to evolutionarily why I think we have menstruation, and holds space for the fact that feels really different than our lived experience around periods in 2025. And that's not how we were educated on menstruation. And so there's a, I don't think anybody who's laying on the couch with the heating pad feels like, oh my gosh, this is keeping me safe. And I want to acknowledge that. But yeah, my scientific understanding is that this is A, what allows for reproduction, but it's also what allows us to think about reproduction in a smart and optimized way that reflects human evolutionary fitness, in addition to just, as opposed to just making as many babies as possible in a short amount of time, because we have a lifespan. Not only do we have periods, we have menopause, which is I'm pretty sure even rarer than menstruation in the animal kingdom. Yeah.
Yep. Yep, that's right. You gave a great explanation for it. And it's one might think evolutionarily bleeding every month, being in pain, having hormonal
Hmm.
changes, how inconvenient. But that actually tells you how dangerous pregnancy is, that this is
Yeah.
actually more cost
Yeah.
effective than being pregnant all the time, based on your life.
Absolutely. And I do just want to give a shameless plug into one of our product iterations that I'm feeling really excited about. We launched a beta back in October and worked with several beta users or pilot users in the first iteration of Sara, several of whom were based in and around Nashville, in my home state of Tennessee. And one of the asks that we got a lot in between October and particularly in November and December was, can we expect a secure pregnancy tracking option within the app?
Mm.
Because I really want to be a parent, but the prospect of giving my data to an app that tells me what size fruit my baby is, given the larger cultural conversation about lack of data privacy and security that we've historically seen in the cycle tracking space, do I want to be doing that to pregnancy apps too? And as we're having a candid conversation about how tough and dangerous pregnancy can really be, I do just want to note that we are rolling out our secure pregnancy tracking functionality of Sara here in the coming weeks, and we protect that data and safeguard it and don't sell it in the same way that we treat our cycle tracking data. And if that resonates with any listeners, we would love to have your feedback as we roll out the first version of that.
How would somebody download it? They just go to the App Store and it's called Sara?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Actually, no, not at all. And that's because we built Sara as a progressive web app, or a
Okay.
PWA, you might hear it called, which means using either your desktop computer or your mobile browser on your phone. You go to sara.yourcomma.com, and that allows people to use private browsing to add another level of security and encryption and protection behind the data. You make your account and you can use the tool there in your browser, or you can create, if you're on a smartphone, a home screen shortcut so that the app looks and feels like a native app. You can see here on my home screen
Mhm.
right here. Boop.
Yeah, I see it.
But what it enables us to do is it enables us to have full control over the data pipeline. If we were to have Sara downloadable in an app store, all of the metadata around that app, when you download it, how often you use it, where you are when you use it, when you delete it, or when you stop using it regularly, all those metadata wouldn't belong to Comma. They would belong to who owns the app store that you downloaded the app from. And so by building a PWA that looks, feels, and behaves exactly like a native app that you download on your phone, but your first entry point is different, it allows us to protect the entire process and the metadata of the app, and as well as the data that you log inside Sara as a cycle tracker, and adhere to our high standards of safety, privacy, sharing, ethics that app stores don't adhere to and that other software companies don't adhere to either.
I am so glad I asked that because I didn't realize
I
that. And
am
that's
I am
actually
too.
like
Thank
the
you.
key point of how it's secure. Because when I had my dating app, for those who are potentially new listeners, my
Mhm.
first startup was a DNA-based dating app, and we were in the iOS and Android app stores.
Mhm.
I couldn't
Mhm.
believe how much of they are the gatekeepers of
Yep.
being apps. They are the
Yep.
only store. It's as if every store in the world was just Walmart, and inside Walmart you could buy different products.
Yes.
But
That's
Walmart was the door you
exactly.
always had to walk through. And
Yep.
I couldn't believe that my company died because they one day changed their policy around who could ask
Yeah.
for DNA in the App Store. I got kicked off. My funding round fell through,
Yep.
and my
Yep.
company
Yep.
was done because Apple decided something.
Absolutely.
So that's a really cool way for other tech companies that want to make secure products like, hey,
Absolutely.
get out of the App Store. By the way, they take
Totally.
30% of all of
Yep.
your membership. So if you, the case study I always like to bring up is Spotify. Spotify makes you sign up for subscription through a website. That's because Apple takes 30% of all your
Right.
subscriptions. So you're paying
Right.
$10 a month for an app. The company actually only gets $7 of that. Apple gets 3.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I love that you brought that up and shared that, because it really speaks to one of our core values, which is autonomy and agency.
hmm.
And we predominantly think about it in terms of our community, right? Like our users, and our users having agency and autonomy over their own data and over their own bodies and choices. And we also think about it internally in terms of a company, and not being on the hook to the App Store terms and conditions changing on a dime, which they do and they have and they will continue to do in a larger socio-political climate. What Apple does is not disjointed from everything else going on in the world. We want to be able to have control and have agency as a company, and that's exactly one of the reasons why we built the way that we did. And that reminds me too of one of our other values, which is community and co-creation. And I think one of the coolest elements of a PWA is you don't have to update in the App Store to get new features. So if you sign up for Sara today and we make, our PCOS symptom management tool live tomorrow, you log in, and if you answered on onboarding that you have a clinically confirmed diagnosis of PCOS, that will just be made available to you tomorrow. You don't have to go to the App Store and update it. Or Lord forbid we have a typo, which we do, or we change the design of something, or we unlock a new functionality or make a current functionality better. That process will just happen without burdening you or an end user with the onus of, I can't believe I have to go update this thing again because I want to order a salad, or I need to call a
For,
ride share,
for
or I
me,
need to what have you.
it's usually you don't have enough storage.
Oh my
And then
gosh,
I have to think about what
constantly.
videos I need to delete.
I
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And I'm such a digital hoarder. Like
I'm a digital
I
hoarder
can't pack
too.
them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, we could talk about that too. But the last part of our interview today, I'd love to talk about some of the products that were featured in my book, Unlocking Women's Health. So,
Yeah.
this is the menstruation episode corresponding to the menstruation chapter. And we have some really cool products, of which I have some right here, one
Yeah.
of which is Day. So, Day is
Mhm.
CBD infused tampons. And not only is the CBD thing really cool about decreasing your pain, but one
Yeah.
of the things I really love is that the applicator is, instead of a single use plastic, because we're all like,
Right.
no more plastic bags, no more plastic anything. And yet
Right.
tampons were like, oh, single use. And
Yep.
because no one wants to talk about it, or at least the sustainability people haven't gotten the memo on
Absolutely.
talking about periods.
Absolutely.
So it's a
Yeah.
sugar cane applicator. So it's water soluble, and the wrapper. And I know we're not living in a 4D world yet where listeners can't feel this live, but the paper around the tampon feels a little different. And that's because it's water soluble as well.
Absolutely.
Another
Hmm.
product in the chapter is Planera, which is the first flushable biodegradable
Yes.
pad out of the
Yeah.
UK.
Yeah.
And Planera told us that in the UK alone makes 200,000 tons of menstrual product waste
It's
in
unbelievable.
landfills.
It's
Whoa.
unbelievable.
And
It's
so I want to
unbelievable.
get you as a menstrual health expert. What do you think
Hmm.
about clean tech and sustainability folks? Are they talking enough about
Absolutely.
menstrual product waste?
No, not at all. Not at all. And I think that the conversation is, not only is it not happening enough, but I honestly think sometimes we're focusing on the wrong things, or not the wrong things, but the conversation needs to be broadened. So I actually got the idea for Kama when I was doing global health research in a rural part of Kenya. And girls were missing school because they didn't have the ability to manage their menstruation despite having access to free products in their communities. Even if they're free, if you don't have a garbage man that comes and takes your trash every Wednesday, a single use pad is not a great fit. And even if they're free, but you don't have a reliable clean water infrastructure to keep a reusable product clean, a menstrual cup or a period panty isn't a great fit either. And so I actually started ideating on Comma, thinking about the consumer product goods space. And we look to Day as a partner in the space. And notice I say partner and not competitor, because again, like I said, women's health and menstruation, particularly, like this is not a zero sum game. This is a huge market and we all go further together. We look at Planera and we look today, they've been industry leaders in the space in terms of material science. And material science is only one part of the environmental science conversation, because I know from my global health work, flushables are really exciting and they're the future. And plumbing infrastructure is really variable around the world, right? So, what might be flushable in a certain neighborhood in London might not be flushable in certain parts of California or New York or Mozambique or Nepal. And so, having this collaborative ecosystem of menstrual care that allows for products that fit people's needs based on where they live, how they live, looking at the diagnostic science of where they are in their reproductive life, right? Did you just start having a period 18 months ago, or are you looking at pre and perimenopause? There's a whole spectrum of what we need to be ideating on in menstrual health. And so we have a sustainable consumer product good coming to market later this year. Also has a biodegradable applicator that's plant-based and again, really look today in terms of how they've led industry, not just in material science, but also in standardization. They're one of the only period companies that I know that insist upon post-manufacturing sterilization procedures. That's huge. The fact that that doesn't exist as a standard within medical device manufacturing is crazy.
For any listener who doesn't understand what that just was, what you just said, essentially most tampon companies, i.e. all of them except for Day, they will create your tampon, put it in a wrapper, and then put it in a box without ever
Yep.
sterilizing it. So
Yep.
without putting
Yep.
it under some UV light to make sure it doesn't have any bacteria or fungus or mold on it. And so this is the first time somebody's created a tampon creating facility that includes a sterilization step, which you
Yes,
might think is
absolutely.
expected and standard and actually not.
And it's not. And I sit on a working group that is looking at global standard settings for the absorbent material within a tampon. And believe it or not, there aren't any. Like, this working group is to start thinking about what the standards should be, because historically there have not been. And menstrual products sit in this really interesting gray area in which, in order to get a new type of menstrual product to market, at least in the United States, you have to go through a class 2 medical device FDA approval process, which is hard and it's expensive, and in a lot of ways can stifle innovation in the space. And they're on the other side of the same coin, we don't have good regulatory standards in place to make sure that the hurdles that we're having menstrual care product companies jump through are the same rules and regulations that actually keep women safe. In some ways, a lot of these standards seem to protect industry rather than protect people.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really hard to transform that space if Mama feels like we have to act alone, if Day feels like they have to act alone, if Aunt Flo, who's also mentioned in your book, feels like they have to act alone. And so I think that founders and operators in this space realize that really early. And so it is a truly collaborative commercial landscape in a way that, to me, just makes sense. Like, it is, I think, the antidote to the consumer landscape that we currently find ourselves in, not in menstrual care, but more generally, which is like, people have a lot of choice, but do they actually have like true optionality? Like, you can go to a shoe store and be inundated with choice around which shoes to buy, but are any of them actually that materially different than the other or make people's lives better? And so when as a space, we accept and build our ecosystem to say there is not a one size fits all menstrual care solution, we're building a bigger table for lots of different founders, commercial entities, nonprofits, research organizations to be able to show up and show out. And there's room for all of it because, as we've mentioned before, like, this is a huge market, over $40 billion a year last year. There's no reason to think that there can't be a couple different players in the space that are simultaneously trying to solve similar problems. And yeah, this chapter in your book was really fascinating to me as someone who works in this space, but it was also a really great reminder, having just come off a capital raise. People ask you all the time how you differ from your competitors. And I actually have a lot of pride in saying, yeah, I think we're different from our competitors, but I also think that there's elements about what we do that overlap with some of these partners in the space. And I think that's useful. And I just don't hear tech founders talking that way about each other a lot. So I don't know. It makes me very grateful to be in women's health and in menstrual health, because it's a special spot.
It is, absolutely. We have one last question for you.
Yeah.
We are starting to see the future with the innovators featured in the chapter. We have people like Helen from Wild AI that's changing nutrition and exercise based on your cycle. You have
cool.
Alex Coble-Franks from The Agenda, who is creating a new productivity tool that links into your calendar to work on things based on your menstrual cycle. We have Kate Morton with Funk It Wellness using seed cycling for nutrition. let's pretend the world was matriarchal, right? Led by females.
Let's
Women have
do
always
it.
been at the
Okay.
table, right?
Yeah.
What do you think the world would look like? And this could be also like your prediction for, because I think it's happening now. What does the
Yeah.
future of the women's health industry look like? What does our lives look like as menstruators? How does our everyday to day change because people have created systems and tools that incorporated our menstrual cycle? What does the future of menstrual cycle incorporated life look like?
Yeah. I think it is a I think it's a world in which we have simultaneously decided to value science again and
Mhm.
to let science and empirical evidence be meaningful and important and lead. And it's a world in which a critical mass of people who have not had the data of their lived experiences taken seriously enough, where we've expanded science to really start to give true validation and study to things that may have otherwise been considered like anecdotal, right? And
Mhm.
so the section of the menstrual cycle chapter on seed cycling was so beautifully articulated in terms of the evidence that was presented, in terms of the nutritional science and dietetics that clearly went into their business model. And a couple of years ago, I think a lot of people would have dismissed seed cycling as pseudoscience. And so it took a woman scientist and entrepreneur to be like, screw that assumption, let me show you. And what would it look like if our kind of traditional Western scientific ecosystem built a longer table and started inviting some of these conversations into the room? And you and I have spoken about this as you were coming off of a yoga retreat the last time that we connected, and we were really just vibing on you can be both, and you can know what makes your body feel better without having data to back it up. And there's probably data to back it up if there's someone willing to ask the right questions.
That's right.
And that feels like a really powerful and different world than the one in which we currently live, because not only are we giving credence and weight to expertise, but we're giving equal credence and weight to curiosity. And that is, I don't know, bring on the matriarchy, if that's what it looks like. That makes me so excited.
I
When
love
I
it.
was reading about wild I wrote a note in my book, and I just want to read it if I can find exactly how I wrote it, which is patriarchy loves to prescribe sex difference. They love to say men are stronger than men, or sorry, men are stronger than women, men are faster than women, what have you. Patriarchy loves to prescribe sex difference until we learn to optimize it. And then all of a sudden it's pseudoscience until we learn how to biohack the cycle. That's been seen as like old wives' tale. Yeah, because we live in a world that wasn't built for us to be successful. And when we figure out how to live in that world and still be gentle and kind with ourselves and informed and support each other, yeah, patriarchy's not going to like it, which is probably why we should keep doing it. So
Let's keep doing
kudos to
it.
all those founders in that chapter. It was like really gas in the tank to read about some of the work that's going on, and also just a good reminder that a couple years before you interviewed some of these folks, they just had an idea too. And as a founder who just closed my seed round, like it's just really cool to be in that phase of translating idea into a tangible reality. And so if you're listening and you haven't read Brittany's book, get to work because it's
Give it
awesome
a
and it's
read and
really
start your
inspiring.
company because the future is led by women. So it may not feel like that right now, but we're here, we're going. The momentum is so real. Miller, thank you so
Yeah,
much for your time today.
it's
This has
been
been
a
an
pleasure.
incredible, exciting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. I'm really grateful that you had me on.